So over the last 20 years or so, I've created many different successful betting and trading systems. You're sort of thinking, what sort of genius do you need to be in order to be able to do that? But the fact is, I don't think you need to be a genius at all. You don't need to have any level of mathematical ability or modeling and stuff like that. You just need to do some very simple things. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. So I'm going to start this video in an unusual place. I'm going to start this video several thousand years ago. And several thousand years ago, a curious man sat down and looked at the sun rising behind a hill, and he looked at the sun and thought, oh, you know, that's interesting because I'm pretty sure it wasn't there the day before. So he went back a month later and he realized that indeed the sun had moved. So he put a marker down. And then he went back a couple of months later and realized that it had moved again. And he continued this process until a year had elapsed, when he realized that the sun rose at exactly the same point. And he could figure out exactly when the sun was going to rise simply by putting a few stones in the ground. Welcome to Stonehenge. Stonehenge is a Neolithic monument. It was done several thousand years BC. And it didn't involve any level of orbital mechanics. It didn't involve a degree in astrophysics. They didn't have computers. They didn't have tape measures. They didn't have modern building equipment and so on. And yet they built a monument that has lasted for many thousands of years. Not only that, but it accurately measures the winter, the summer solstice, and various periods in between. And the reason for starting the video in this area is just to say to you, you know, whatever you're doing, observation is one of the key things that you have in your arsenal. A lot of academic papers and so on talk about theory, and they look at data and they dig around, do all of these weird and wonderful things. But the fact is that all that they're doing is trying to come up with a theory of what could happen. They're not actually measuring or monitoring what actually happened. And I think this is one of the key things that you can do when you're trying to develop a betting or trading system, is to actually gather data and actually do it. Actually look at the system, understand what you're observing, what you're seeing. And, well, you could build Stonehenge, or you could actually find a decent and profitable betting or trading system. So the most important thing when you start a betting or trading system is that you gather data. And one of the best ways to gather data, and I know this sounds odd because people say, well, don't you go off and look at historical data? Well, yes and no, because the problem with historical data is it doesn't tell you how often you're going to get filled or how quickly the trade will complete, or various other factors that are involved in the betting or trading process. So I don't think, you know, use data if you want to get some inspiration or you want to have a play around and look at things, but it's so important that you actually start placing bets as soon as you possibly can, because the advantage of that is the market gives you instant feedback. But also, and I have demonstrated and told you this in other videos, it's important that you don't go into the market and you just have level stakes, because the problem that you're going to have there is that your returns will be distorted by the price at which you were betting. So it's much, much better that you back to a target profit, or you lay to a target liability, because what happens then is that risk balances itself out. You're betting more when you have a short priced favourite, or you're making more when a short priced favourite loses if you're laying, and the whole thing sort of balances that out. But you take much less risk when the outcome is much less certain, and that means you equalise your stake to the level of risk that you are taking. And the advantage with that is when you actually get a return from that strategy, whatever you're deploying, then what you will find is that any profit that you get drops straight into your P&L, and all of the risk is equalized on the other side of the equation. So that is always the best way to do it. But one of the things I recommend is that you get stuck in as quickly as you can. So what are you going to do? What strategy are you going to deploy, and how are you going to come up with that idea? Well, I think, all of my best ideas sort of just come out of the blue to me. I'm constantly thinking through things that I would like to try, or sort of thinking, I wonder what happens if, I wonder what the situation is. So, and I never make assumptions, because you go into it and you want to go into it completely with a clear mind, because you may accidentally end up influencing what you're attempting to do. So I'll go in with an idea. I'll sort of, I'll be on the toilet or in the bath, or I'm out on the bike or something. and I'm just thinking through things in my head, clearing my mind, getting all of this stuff out of the way. And then suddenly I sort of think, I wonder what happens if you do this, or why is that the case? And that's where most of my ideas come from. I'm just sort of playing with ideas, concepts. And very often I'll sort of do thought experiments, sort of saying, well, if somebody does this, then I wonder what they're thinking when they go to do that, or is there an advantage in doing this? Those sort of things. So I don't have any particular structure in terms of the way that I approach things. I'll read reports, I'll look at academic, I'll do all of those things. But generally the idea for something new sort of pops into my head at some point when I'm thinking about a particular problem. Or when I'm actively trading or betting, I'm sort of thinking, I can't believe that's happened again. And then I sort of think, I wonder if there's a way that I can exploit that. So those are sort of where a lot of the ideas come from. And I think that when you're trying to be creative and come up with elegant solutions to problems, that's often the best way to do it. I think if you become too rigorous mathematically or academically, then you end up painting yourself into a corner. So if you want to find something that's really interesting, it's better just to let your mind run free and come up with some ideas, even if they seem completely bonkers or crazy. It's worth a shot. So yeah, I don't have any hard, fast rule about the sort of thing that I do. And as I'm about to show you, some of the ideas can just be incredibly simple. So whenever I come up with an idea, I will go into the market and start placing bets immediately. And what I will also do is the first stage of this, when I'm thinking about heading in this direction, is I'll go into the market and I will have try and form a baseline, which is what you can see here. The idea is, what happens if you do this at random? Because what you're trying to prove is that you are using skill and that there is some basis on which you are making the decision. There is some reason why this particular, when you go into this, you have to sort of say, I'm going to do the following for the following reason, because I think that blah, 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 blah. But the first stage is you go into the market and you just use no skill whatsoever, and you'll often end up with a graph like the one that we see here, because what this graph is me going into the market, trying to form that baseline, just betting without any skill whatsoever, and of course you expect it to sort of just slowly decline, which is more or less exactly what we see here, because we're losing commission on this, but we're not really making any money, so it just gently declines away. And that may seem a bit dispiriting, but it's good, because that tells you that the market is behaving the way that it should do, and really you shouldn't lose too much money as long as you do it at the correct level. And you don't have to use big stakes. You can use sort of £2 stakes, £5, £10 or whatever. Preferably go in at the lowest level while you're confirming that you're doing things right. But generally the sort of graph that you will get sort of ends up with a very slow gradual decline. And you're sort of thinking, well, what's the point in that? The point is that it proves that if you go into the market at random, it's going to produce roughly random results, hopefully break even minus commission. And that gives and confirms the base for you, because what you're going to do next is you're going to modify it, and then you're going to compare that to this particular sample, and that will tell you if you have something that is worthwhile. So before we review what actually happens with this deployment of this particular system, I wanted to give you some sort of background as to how you would develop a system, because if you go into any market at random, you're obviously not going to make any money whatsoever. And if I wind myself back to the very start of my Betfair trading career, lots of people were scalping at this particular moment in time. They were just going for like a one-tick gain. And when I started doing that, I could see very, very quickly that there were certain things that didn't make any sense. So if you went into every single market and tried to scalp it, you would get absolutely slaughtered on some markets, whereas some markets would work really well. And it didn't take any genius for me to be able to see that. After 100 races or so, you could tell that was happening. You would be going along making little bits of money, and then you'd see a huge, great loss. And you'd sort of think, I've completely wasted the day there. But there were two reactions to this. One is, this definitely doesn't work, and it's all rubbish, and I've been totally ripped off by this, conned by some guru. Or you look at a situation and you sort of say, hold on a second, maybe I'm not doing it quite right here, or maybe I'm doing it in the wrong market. And it was obvious to me very, very early on, like just months into my journey into Betfair trading, that if I tried to scalp a novice or a maiden race at shorter prices, that would be where I just couldn't make any money. So my answer to that was really, really simple, and that was, do not scalp those races. And then instantly my results became significantly better. And all I was doing is cutting out mistakes. And that's, one of the best things that I think you can do. Go into the market with some crazy harebrained system, some grand idea that you've had while you were sat on the toilet or something, and deploy it. And then very, very quickly you will learn situations where that all goes wrong. And your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to look at those losses and say, why did those losses occur and how can I avoid those in the future? And very often that is all that you need in order to turn something profitable. You obviously need an idea, you need to understand what you're doing, and then you need to understand why it didn't work in those markets. But just cutting those losses is very often good enough in order to get you to profitability. So if you look at this graph, you can see all of this sort of playing out. We've got this period of decline where I'm betting completely at random. Incidentally, this is a betting system, it's not a trading system. And then the results begin to tick up. And this shows you that the whole thing was working. My idea was valid and that it was having an impact when I deployed it. And all that I'm doing here is I'm striking out the markets that I don't think are going to work. That's all that I'm doing. That initial data that came through allowed me to gather data and see what would happen completely at random. But it also allowed me to contrast and compare and say, well, it looks like this will actually work, because I can look at the data, split it out and say, I think this is going to work. And then the uptick that you can see is when I actually started deploying it. And like I said, all I'm doing here is striking out markets that aren't suitable. And the remarkable thing is this is a betting system on horse racing. And the reason that it came around is when I was actively trading, I would often look at stuff and then just sort of think, well, that's far too short, and well, that's far too big. And I translated that, oh, that's far too big, far too short, into just a set of rules that I thought may work if my judgment on watching those markets was correct. So yeah, went in, deployed the system at random, and then struck out the markets where I felt that rule should apply. And lo and behold, I now have another profitable system that will run automatically in the background for me while I'm busy doing other things. And when you look at, this happens across all different sports as well. And when you look across all of these markets, there are all these little bumps and ripples within the market. Some of them are obvious or more obvious, and some of them aren't so obvious. But I'm pretty sure that you must have had a thought at some point sort of saying, well, I can't believe that that's correct, or this is correct, or, there must be a situation when here in this sport that this happens, that there must be a certain effect in play. And these are the sort of things that very often don't come out through statistics or data mining. They come out through active participation in the markets, which is where this particular strategy came from. So when you want to come up with an idea, then I suggest one of the things that you do is follow this exact methodology, because it's something that I've used over many years very successfully, and it's uncovered a whole multitude of individual systems. And one of the things that you end up with is you go down this path, you learn something new, and then you sort of think, I wonder if this works here or within this context. And then lo and behold, you figure out that this happens right across the market. I think there are two videos that I can do on this that would help you. One would be, how do you know if it's working? And the other one would be, what causes these inefficiencies within the markets? I think they're almost two separate videos. I was thinking about talking about it on this video, but it would end up about an hour long. But I can actually give you the answer to both of those things as well. But the primary reason for doing this video was to say to you, look, I'm still coming up with interesting and new stuff even after 20 odd years in the market. There are loads of little things within the market that you can find that give you a little bit of an edge. And one of the best ways to do that is to actively participate in the market. Come up with an idea, test it with the correct staking system, and then start varying it. And one of the best ways to vary it is to strike out those losses. Look at those losses, understand how they were created, strike them out, and then it's very likely that you will be profitable too.